Brad, number one, it's hard almost to receive some of that. Brad and I do go way back, and I told David Offke, and by the way, I just repeat what Brad said. David, I'm so thankful for you and Matt and all of you guys that have put this together. It's just a great reminder of not to neglect gathering together. And I'll speak about that in a minute. But Brad was best man at my wedding. So I'll try not to get emotional, Brad. Susan's maid of honor became his wife. So we have traveled a lot of roads together, but the most meaningful road has been really God's call on both our lives. And we both have been on that road together for a good while now in terms of understanding what that really means. And I just want to say something about that experience that Brad, and I know Clayton's here too, his son, and their family went through with Carly. Brad said something to me one time in the midst of that I always have remembered, Brad. Brad said to me, he said, Fred, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but I'm thankful for going through this. I've always remembered that. And I don't know how many of you have gotten one of those calls, and I got one last week from a dear friend of mine, actually from my wife, about actually a person has spoken here, R.C. Slocum, Cone's dear friend, and that John Harvey had passed out, and actually his heart had stopped on the golf course, and he flatlined for 12 minutes. And, just this last week, I saw such a great picture of the family of God in Midland, Texas, and here in Houston, and gathered around that family, and how God not only answered amazing prayers. I rode around the pickup yesterday with John Harvey, which is the most amazing thing. He was literally dead a week ago, and I was riding around the pickup with him yesterday in College Station. I mean, only God. But the picture of the family of faith gathered together last week in a little waiting room in Midland, Texas, and here, and people all around the globe just praying and gathered together was just a great reminder that we don't wish this stuff on anybody. But Brad, I thought about your comment a bunch this week, just thinking about that, and how God uses what we view as so bad to bring us together to draw us to Him. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to share with you today. I've been praying about what I would say. I really was most excited, though, to hear Brad talk, because I've never heard Brad talk about that, and I know that's not his, comfort to share like that. And Brad, I'm just so thankful for your obedience that you said yes when David called you. Man, I love you, brother. I want to thank, too, some folks that are here. We got a bunch of Aggies here, so to the Aggie family, thank you for being here. I feel like I'm at home. Whoop, giggle, howdy. Our JH, Outback JH family, we got a bunch of you guys here. And I tell you, I look out there, Stan, Gonzo, man, I just see you guys, all of you, and just like, man, I feel like I'm at home. Mike, Alejo, and I just look out there. I'm so thankful to see you guys here. And then I've got my pastor, Jesse McMillan, right here, friend Tom next to him, so I got to be careful what I say today. I'm going to tell you a little of my story, and I'm going to tell you some things I've learned along the way. And I don't know if you're like me, when I come to these things, I'm like, okay, what is it, Lord, you want me to take away from this? So I don't know what God has for you. So a lot of times, for me, it's just what God's ministering to me, and I'm going to share what He's doing with me. And if some of that's useful to you, hopefully it is. Just leave it at that. I grew up in Del Rio, Texas, on the border of Mexico. My dad was a pastor, my mother a nurse. We grew up I was talking to somebody, Max, who was just in Del Rio. Max Flynn, where's Max? Max over there, great country artist, played a gig over there. He's a dear friend of Brad and I's son. And anyway, he said, well, I was up by the Ramada Inn. I said, well, let me tell you, where I grew up in Del Rio is a long ways from the Ramada Inn. So if you could grow up on the wrong side of tracks in Del Rio, I grew up on the other side of the tracks. I grew up next to San Felipe. which would be like in Houston, one of the wards. And I grew up next to San Felipe, and I loved it. And I went to all Hispanic schools. You can imagine a tall Anglo kid, kind of stood out. I was about a foot taller than all the rest of them. And, but man, I'm going to tell you, those folks were family. They still are today. And my closest friends were from that culture and from that environment. It was a special place to grow up. I enjoyed it. I went to church all the time. When you're a pastor's kid, you go to all church stuff. Any pastor's kids, PKs? Man, there you go. So you get drugged to all of it, really. I mean, you go to all of it. You go to all, and you have to. So for me, I knew a lot about church. I thought I would go to Baylor. I had a brother that played football at Baylor, and Baylor didn't recruit me. Appropriately so. Wasn't that good? But I went up and met with Emory Ballard, Coach Ballard, my summer before I went to college, and he said, well, Fred, why don't you come in with a freshman class? You can be a walk-on. I didn't know what a walk-on was, and I didn't want to go to smaller schools and all that. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I want to play the Southwest Conference. And I'd never heard the term walk-on, so I go to A&M. I show up in a little suitcase, Kane Hall, and I found out what a walk-on was. The first practice, you show up, they hand you a green jersey, and they give you a helmet with your name taped on the front of it, and you look over, and all the kids that were recruited wore maroon jerseys, and they had no tape on their helmet because the coaches knew their name. And learned quickly what a walk-on was. I tell you that because for me, that was a moment of trying to figure out who the heck I was. And I don't know how many of you have been in that journey in life, but for me, a lot of times in life, it's about identity. And so at A&M, I was like, well, who am I? Right? Am I a guy with a green jersey on and name taped on the helmet? Or, can you be one of those guys in a maroon jersey? And that became a real purpose for me at A&M. And sure enough, within a year, I've got a maroon jersey. I got a scholarship, got the name taped off my helmet, and that part went well. But my identity became very tied to that maroon jersey and being a football player and doing all that stuff. And I put a lot of stock in that. I didn't go to church, by the way. I was a member of FCA. It's funny, I spoke at an FCA banquet earlier, the end of last year, at FCA banquet at College Station. I said, I'm the most unlikely guy you'd ever had come speak to FCA. I never went to FCA. I never went in college. That's where I was. The fifth year, next to last game, I'd graduated in 4 years. I was in grad school. We had a new head coach. We had Tom Wilson, and we replaced him with a guy named Jackie Sherrill. Coach Sherrill came in from Pitt, highest paid coach in the country at the time. So that sounds familiar at A&M. We have a history of repeating things. It's a tradition. So one of our traditions is pay the most for football coaches at the appropriate time. So he came in, and it really was a brutal process, to say the least, that season, and he would say the same thing. And it was just probably the hardest year of my life, what happened that year. And I've told Susan, my wife, by the way, that there's never been a harder year, and so far there hadn't been. And by the end of that year, next to last game, long story short, I got a knee destroyed on Kyle Field, and that's the end. It's funny, I don't know if any of you have ever been hurt bad playing sports, but I was hurt bad. And I knew immediately I'd never play that game again. I was kind of hoping maybe I'll keep playing and all that kind of stuff, and it was over. And I graduated then from A&M. Susan and I got married. I went to work. All my friends went to work for accounting business. I'm sorry to all the accountants, but boy, I'd be the worst accountant in the world. So I had an undergraduate degree in accounting and a degree in finance. I'm not going to do that. I didn't go to work at consulting firms. So I went to work for a home builder. And so here I am out in the suburbs of Houston building houses and putting in streets and utilities. And I tell you, my identity went with that. And there was a point in the 80s there where I just didn't even know that I really wanted to continue. And I'd hit a real bottom point. And fortunately, God put me on my knees and really called me to do something that I've never done. And it goes on with what Brad was saying. I don't know about you men, but I think for a lot of us men, it's the hardest thing. And that was God called me to surrender. We don't like to surrender. And I was taught my whole life. I played for a coach at A&M, a guy named Paul Register. And I can tell you, Coach Cash would never have you surrender. But I had to surrender and get out of the way. And that was one of the hardest things, and yet one of the greatest things that ever happened in my life was to do this. You see, I like to say this, and something that God's really been teaching me lately is that it's one thing to believe. It's one thing to believe, but it's a totally different thing to surrender and trust. See, I can believe in God, but do I have enough faith to follow Him? If you'd asked me in college, Fred, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? Oh, man, sure. Absolutely. I've been to church. My dad's a pastor. I know what elders are. I know what deacons are. I know what committee meetings are. I know what the youth group is. I didn't like any of it. It had no meaning or bearing. And the reason it had no meaning or bearing is because I never was willing to listen and to surrender. So mid-'80s was the surrender time. And then I'll tell you a second time. My friend Mike, who's back here. So we started our company in 1990. I worked for a developer who really wasn't a developer in the 80s. If you remember those times, not a lot of fun. So 1990, we come out of that. We had no money, no capital, not the way to start a business for any of you folks that are looking to start a business. No capital. So what do? Well, I tell you what, we'll be real estate brokers. Never done that in my life. Had no idea what that was, you know. We'd hired brokers for real estate stuff. So we started a little brokerage company and built that up. And then we started buying assets about a year and a half later. And then we did our first land development about 5 years later. And actually, amazingly, things worked. But for me, in that, I felt like the reason they were working is because of me. Now, I put my faith in Christ, and I had surrendered, and I had a pastor that had me under his arm that Tom knows, Scott, that really was moving me along. But I thought it was up to me. We moved our offices here at the end of this year. Cleaning out your desk. Anybody done that in a long time? I hadn't moved in 14 years. We moved our offices, and I'm pulling through all these files out. Now, I'm a goal guy, so I'll pull out this sheet of goals, 1997 or 8. And the first goal was be home for dinner one night a week. And boy, I sat there. And it just reminded of where I was. And I don't think, by the way, that was one night in 5. I worked every day of the week. I'd go to church on Sundays. I'd go back to the office. I was so determined to admit that it was dependent on me. And my friend Mike back here that had been our financial guy and took care of our accounting, in 2000, he said, hey, I'm going to sponsor you to go to this little deal out in California called the J.H. Ranch. Why don't you take your daughter, Amanda? Amanda was 12. And I tried to cancel and all this crazy stuff, but I ended up going. And like Brad, I met God head on. I did it for Amanda because, let's get her situated right. I'm fine. And God met me head on up there. And one night, they have a big top tent. Those of you in the J.H. Ranch or Outback, you know what I'm talking about. A big top tent. You go do church in a big top tent. It's one of the coolest things ever. But I heard a guy talk, and he talked about what drives us to do the things we do, the crazy things we do. And for me, it's all about identity, and I had to be successful at what I did. Why? And he spoke about that, and really a lot of it came down to who was I trying to prove something to. And for me, it came down to I really, as a kid, I always wanted my mother to love me. And it was wrapped around the axle on that. And that had led to a lot of bad decisions and a lot of bad stuff. And I always remember walking up the hill out of that big top tent. I had this guy from Cincinnati, and the speaker that night had said, you've got to really let this stuff go. It's the only way God heals is to let it go. And there was a whole lot of stuff I'd never told anybody in my life. This guy's eyes got that big as I just downloaded a whole lot of stuff. And it was what I call the second big surrender that I had to do. And that's letting go of all the rocks that I was carrying around for all those years. And so I'm going to give you 3 things that have since been God's work in me that I was thinking about that I'd share with you today. Because from that point on that hill, letting that stuff go, it's for me been a continual battle to surrender and let stuff go and not really be too concerned about what you think of me. Because I want you to think good of me. I want you to think that guy's successful and that guy's this and that guy, you know. But God has a greater plan than that. So here's 3 things that God's been working on me, and I'll share with you. The first is something that started a long time ago, is starting every morning in prayer. And I have a little journal. I brought it up here. I have a little journal. I start every morning on my knees, literally, by the way. And I don't mean figuratively. I literally get down on my knees. The reason I do that, because there's so much of me that I want to get into a position that says, I'm not God. You're God, I'm not. And I pray, and I read my Bible. And then I write down what God's told me. And then I do something else I'll share with you. I send myself a text every day. I don't know if anybody does that. That's probably weird, but maybe it's old age, Brad. I sent myself a text this morning, and I call it the play of the day. I want to go to the coach every morning and get a play, and I want to run that play for the day. So this morning was reflect the light of Christ. Just be a reflection of Christ today. Fred, would you do that for me? I think that's what God was telling me this morning. Fred, would you do that today? Would you just reflect me to everybody you meet? And I said, now I've got a couple passages in here that tie to that. So the play of the day. So that's a discipline that God's given me. The second thing that for me is continuing to grow my identity in Christ and not in the affirmation necessarily of man is the surrounding myself with good counsel. There's a psalm I love that says this: do not walk in the way of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of the mockers, but put your delight in the law of the Lord. It says, meditate on this day and night. And it says this, it says, you'll be like a tree planted by streams of water, and you'll bear fruit. You'll bear fruit in season. I don't know if any of you guys have been like me, but I've had some seasons where I'm not bearing a lot of fruit. I mean, I've had some seasons where I'm just struggling. But then this scripture says one more thing. And your leaves will never wither. Tree stays green all the time when we're tapped into the Lord. So that's why I start every day that way. And the other thing is not walking in unwise counsel. And there's a lot of you here that are great. All the Outback, I mean, I love you guys. You're great counsel to me. I feel like I could tell you guys anything. I can tell Brad anything. Brad's been great counsel to me over the years. You know, so many of you. My pastor, Jesse, you know, we talked on the way home, you know. I was telling him some stuff going on at the house, you know. I'm like, man, I've got some struggles. I tell you, it is Satan's ploy, guys. I'll just tell you right now, it's been my experience. It's Satan's ploy to think that we can hold it in and man it up. Because freedom comes from letting it go. Amen. But it's the hardest thing, guys. Because society tells you as a man, you better own it and hold it within. And it is the cancer that eats us up from inside. That's been my experience. So wise counsel. Start early in the morning in the Word. Surround yourself with good people that can speak truth and wisdom. And by the way, wisdom only comes one place, God. It says that in the Scriptures. God is the source of wisdom. So I want to talk to people who, guess what, are what? Plugged into God. That's who I want to hear from. And then third thing is using our business as a platform. I believe the marketplace is the greatest platform God has given mankind to share Christ. I just believe that. We have this crazy vision statement we came up with years ago in our company. It says, starts with, we honor God. And it's three things. But we start with, we honor God. It's funny, I spoke at A&M here a week ago, right behind you, Brad. Brad just spoke in there at the architecture school. They deleted the front entry of our vision statement. They had this vision statement up there and said these three things, steward and resource culture, but they deleted, we honor God. So I said it when I got up there. And here's the thing about the marketplace that I think is so cool, is we can be a light where God puts us. In our offices, in a real estate deal, an oil and gas deal, whatever. How we treat our employees. The marketplace is an unbelievably, an unbelievable vehicle that God has given us to share Christ. I don't believe there's any part-time ministry. I hear people say, I'm thinking about going into full-time ministry. I'm like, well, why don't you do that right now? Let's just do that now. Let's be full-time ministers right now. Right here from this luncheon forward, let's just all say we're in full-time ministry. In accounting, real estate, oil and gas. Let's just all be pastors out in the marketplace. And I've found that it just works. We've had more people come to know the Lord in our office. People that go to work for us and whatnot. We have chaplains that wander around. Cloy Smith, God love him, is an unbelievable guy, wandering around praying with people. We have people that just come to know the Lord from a business perspective. And, we start meetings with a prayer. I don't know. I'm just weird that way, but I don't worry about where somebody else is coming from. I just kind of want them to know the truth of what we know to be the truth. Amen. I just don't worry a lot about it. And so I just encourage all of you here, I think it's the reason God put me here, is just encourage you to be bold. A bright light in the marketplace, in a very broken world that needs to hear truth. And so God brought you here for some reason today. And I just would encourage you one thing is be bold today in your witness. So for me, those things have helped continue to grow my identity. I tell you, I struggle still though. I struggle with the flesh. And yet I'm reminded daily that it's the flesh of Christ on the cross that died for me, that my identity would be rooted in that. And not being a real estate guy in Houston, Texas, and all that other stuff. And that'd be my prayer for all of you. Things change fast in life. I call them left-hand turns in the road. Rooting ourselves in Christ gives us a firm foundation to stand on for when you get those calls. My friend Jesse down here, who's our pastor, 4 years ago started having headaches. Turned out he has brain cancer. They didn't think no one expected he'd be sitting here today. And here he sits. And he's leading a congregation. Can't expect that stuff. 4 children. But Jesse, my dear friend, he says this, let's just see what the Lord has. For me, standing on that foundation of Christ. Surrounding myself with good counsel like Brad, and Mike, and all Stan. Guys that I know love me and care about me. And being in the Word daily have created a foundation that stands these winds. And so I'd like to close. Well, I think we got somebody coming up to a prayer, but I'm going to pray anyway, if y'all don't mind. Can we have two prayers? Would that be, is that? We can do some questions. Oh, yeah, Q&A, I'm sorry. Yeah, do we have time? I'm sorry, I probably went long. Is there any question? Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
It's easy to know of you through your real estate work. How I first emotionally connected to you to learn about your faith, and you touched on it today. The marketplace ministries, those ministers that go around your office and pray with every one of the people. That is when you and I have never met. That's when I felt like I know you. Thank you for that, Eric.
Oh, well, thank you. Anybody that doesn't do that, I encourage you, if you're out there in business. Oh, Brad does this. Marketplace Ministry is one of the, we use them. They're awesome. Chaplains in the office are phenomenal. Anybody else?
What the Aggies going to do this season?
They're going to do well, Brad. The Aggies. What are the Aggies going to do? We're well coached now. I think we're well coached.
When you spoke at A&M and they took down We Honor God,
yeah.
What did that say to you?
Say what did it what?
What did that? I mean, did you know they were going to take that down? And you were shocked when they did?
I didn't know they were going to put it up, so I was. Brad knows this fella. He's. I didn't know, but I wasn't shocked. And A&M's a very conservative school. I like to say it's the largest Christian school in the country. No offense, but go to Rudder on Wednesday nights, and we've got 10? Not Rudder. Yeah. Breakaway, and we've got 10,000, 12,000 there on Wednesday nights. I mean, very conservative, but it's the world we live in.
Which is my point, very sad. We got to take that down. I went to Cornell. They would take it down in a second, but down at A&M,
But we get to speak. And people still hear. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, David, thank you very much for the invite. And can I pray over you guys? So I just really feel compelled to pray over you guys. And Lord, I thank you for these men that you brought here today. And it's no accident that you brought any of us here. You knew from the beginning of time that we'd be sitting in this room. And Lord, I just thank you for Brad sharing his story, your story through his life. And I thank you for Carly's health, Lord, and for the miraculous work you did there. I thank you for John Harvey's health and the miraculous work you did there this week. Lord, may we be a family of faith that stands for you. And Lord, may we be bold in our witness, in our offices, in the marketplace, wherever you put us. May we be a bright light that would glorify you, Jesus. Amen.